being younger, and I got into a disagreement with my dad. He grabbed my folder full of sketches from Avatar: The Last Airbender and Shigokera, and he grabbed a picture of myself that I had drawn. And he told me, "Valeria, you only draw sad things. Why are you always so sad?" His words resonated with me for a second, and sure, I guess it was cool listening to My Chemical Romance wearing the dark eyeliner and fingerless gloves from Hot Topic, but there was something strange about my sadness. And that was the first time that I realized my sadness was considered bad. People who are sad all the time were crazy and unsuccessful. And I did not want to be either. Take a second and hold on to the first feeling that you get when you hear the following words: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, huh? I did too. When I used to think of mental illness, I would think of someone homeless asking for money, someone who struggles with a substance abuse, or someone who the media identifies as the mass shooter. Mental health is a topic that has often been ignored and stigmatized, and the results are evident today, particularly in regards to college-bound students. The disregard for mental health education, the shortage of resources, and the lack of urgency for addressing these issues sends a quiet message that's being received in a deafening manner to teenagers and young adults across the nation. If you can't handle a few weeks of negativity, you are weak and a failure. Now, these stigmas make having a productive conversation about mental health incredibly difficult. However, once they've been broken down, it's easier to have that conversation and show that we can show our youth that they can feel empowered and ask for help. By properly educating our youth on the realities of mental illness and how it is not exclusive from success, we can create a culture of brave spaces. Brave spaces where students can learn about the realities of mental health, see positive role models who suffer from mental illness and empower these students to ask for help, and ultimately open the conversation to provide adequate support and resources for these individuals. So, growing up, I was doing everything right. I was taking the accelerated classes, I was going to an amazing university, and I had great support from my family. I felt like I could easily function in my day-to-day life. Speaking up about my sad feelings felt very uncomfortable though. When you have a bubbly personality and you're on the honor roll and your biggest societal flaw is that you just happen to watch a little bit too much anime, getting people to take you seriously is very frustrating. I would have extreme highs, days when I could feel my brain just race at 100 miles per hour and I'd easily be productive from dusk until dawn. But I would also have extreme lows. Days when I felt that brushing my teeth was really the only thing that I could accomplish. I brushed it off as laziness because the term bipolar disorder was terrifying, and I was taught that that word meant emotionally unstable. That was the beginning of me invalidating my experiences due to a lack of proper education on mental health. I thought that if I associated myself with that word, it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I was not sick. And I was not crazy. So I easily hid behind my resume and extracurriculars, my own form of antidepressants. Hiding behind accomplishments, social media likes, and smiles, surprisingly easy. People who get good grades can't have states of mania. People who are loved aren't depressed. People who are happy just don't live with mental illness. The transition from youth to adulthood is incredibly taxing though. Once we enter the workforce or head off to college, we become small grains of sand on the world's beach, and we feel like our lives become indistinguishable and insignificant. We leave the security of home and trade it for an overwhelming amount of pressure to succeed. It's often during this vulnerable time that mental illnesses manifest and make their grand debut. I know this because it was around this time when I began to seriously struggle with a self-harming addiction as a way to cope with the pressure and the negative feelings. But I justified it to myself as it being okay because I was not breaking the law, nor was I hurting anybody else in the process. So I kept my suicidal thoughts to myself. I thought that internalizing my struggle was just a part of adulthood, a rite of passage that I was failing at. None of the role models in my life ever mentioned struggling with depressive thoughts, and the people who did were always labeled as weak and little resilience. So I was stuck, and I felt that the only way out of this conundrum was just by calling it quits. I would have rather been dead than been labeled as weak or mentally ill. On December 2nd, 2015, I attempted to commit suicide. I was hospitalized the following day. I had my own reservations about going inside the unit, and it actually led me to question my own sanity. Maybe I was crazy after all. But my time in the unit is not what I expected. Of the people I met included a doctor, a lawyer, an actor, an artist, a mother, and so many more. They were regular people with careers and dreams and aspirations, and then it dawned on me. Mental illness is experienced by regular people. I had been so petrified of this word crazy, as if it would somehow condemn me to live a life of failure. But mental illness does not discriminate based on class, gender, ethnicity, or your level of success. This representation in the hospital showed me what it was like to live with a mental illness. It's like a cold, and it can really affect anybody. But I can still succeed with my dreams. I remember engaging in a conversation with one of the patients while I was hospitalized, and she asked me what I was in for. When I told her that I was in for a failed suicide attempt, she kind of laughed and told me, "You seem incredibly high functioning, but I guess those are the most dangerous ones." Now, at first, I didn't really understand what she meant by dangerous or high functioning, but after hours of self-reflection, and believe me, they give you a lot of that when you're in a psychiatric hospital, I realized that I was considered dangerous because I wanted to hide everything so well, and I refused to ask for help to fit in with what I thought my success looked like. All the news stories of varsity athletes, valedictorians, and celebrities who took their own lives have one thing in common when their loved ones were writing their eulogies. We never saw this coming. And maybe those individuals never saw positive and proper representation of their mental illnesses in their role models. Very rarely do we see the conversation of overcoming the mental struggle within the realms of success. I was discharged with an official diagnosis and the false belief that I was now cured. I thought the hospital was the end of my journey, but it was really only the beginning. It gave me the tools to build myself up from scratch, and I felt empowered to use them and tear down the stigmas and lack of resources that had brought me and so many others there. I remember reluctantly calling counseling services when the suicidal thoughts got really bad. I held my breath, just dialing the number to the counseling center, waiting to schedule a triage appointment, which is essentially the equivalent of a mental health checkup, right? I was told that I could not be seen for 5 weeks. Now imagine that you're sick with a cold or a flu and you call your doctor. You'd usually be seen between 2 to 3 days, right? I had to wait 5 weeks. If it took that long for me to be seen, whatever I was feeling must not have been important enough to have the proper resources allocated for it. It took a suicide attempt for me to be seen by a psychiatrist in a timely fashion, and I know I'm not the only one with an experience like this. After sharing my story, I was named as the head chairwoman for the Mental Health Advocacy Task Force at the University of Florida, and we were tasked with finding funding for the remaining 4 counselors for a counseling and wellness center. So we held a letter writing campaign and had 123 students come out and write personalized letters supporting more funding for the counseling services. 4 hours and 123 future leaders and innovators of the world, all with a connection to mental illness. If our students are struggling and trying to get help, we have a responsibility to provide them the adequate resources and focus more on preventative care as opposed to reactionary. We have been conditioned to fear being chronically unhappy and associate that with failure. And we drive students to not want that association. But by stripping mental illness from its fear factor, we, as a society, can see it for what it really is: an illness and not a character trait that prohibits you from achieving your goals and aspirations. So I want to pause and ask you to gauge your second reaction when I repeat the following words again. Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. It has been said that your primary reaction to something is how you were socialized to think, and your secondary reaction determines who you are as a person. Know that these words do not define an individual or what they are capable of achieving. Individuals with mental illnesses exist, and they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're CEOs, scholars, and athletes. They're our parents, our siblings, and our friends. If you take a second, look around to your left and to your right, people in this very room have gone through a circumstance very similar to mine, and many others as well. We need to teach young adults that it's okay to ask for help, and that a diagnosis does not prohibit them from achieving their goals. This can be done with something as simple as when someone asks you, "Hey buddy, how's it going?" You not being afraid to respond, "Honestly, I've kind of been feeling a little blue," because you know that your sadness does not mean you're crazy. You can talk about how you overcame depression and be that positive role model and representation for a student and show them that, hey, if you made it, then maybe so can they. You can vote in politicians who adequately advocate for proper mental health resources for our students, so these children don't feel like they have to wait 4 to 5 weeks to be seen by a counselor. It's time for us to come together and be comfortable in the uncomfortable and challenge these stigmas, not because we're afraid of what they have alluded to, but because we're brave of what we can and have achieved despite them. Thank you.